Hey, this is Dr. D. We're going to talk coronavirus again. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the data from another site. It's called Worldometer, and they have data for different countries and fortunately for the US for different states. We've talked about California before, so I thought it'd be useful to look at the data from California and compare it to the data from Sweden. Now, Sweden, as some of you may know, decided to be very different than most other countries and most other states in the US for that matter. They've decided to let the disease run its course. And their argument, and it's not an unreasonable argument, although the media has been very negative about it, their argument is that the ultimate cure for coronavirus is immunity obtained by enough healthy individuals to make the incidence of the disease fall off and with it death rate. That's basically the concept called herd immunity. And it's been poo pooed upon by a lot in the media who've been very uncharitable regarding how they viewed Sweden's decisions in this regard. But let's look from the status of California. We've talked about California before. The last time I checked on the data from Google, the deaths in California were something around 2,200, and that was around 6 weeks ago. So now, according to Worldometer, the deaths are around 6,000. So that's, 2.5 times or so the deaths before. But take into account in California, like other states in the US, we've had a very irregular practical situation. I mean, the policy's been shelter in place, etc., but then we've had demonstrations, people without masks running around, rioting. So the actual exposure is naturally going to go up, and the number of cases are going to go up, which actually brings up another point. What does this term coronavirus cases really mean? If you talk about anybody, including healthy young people who have the disease, meaning they have been exposed to and have coronavirus, that's like talking about something that's very nebulous because the number of young people who die from coronavirus, as many of you may know, is next to none. The people who die or get seriously ill from coronavirus tend to be older people, and more importantly, they tend to be people who have issues with their circulatory system or their pulmonary system, for example, with asthma. And actually, interestingly enough, a lot of diabetics also do poorly with coronavirus. And you'll find that when you listen to TV shows, the media doesn't really tell you about who is sick or how many people are being admitted to the hospital, except occasionally. And they don't always center upon deaths, which would be a little more honest. But nevertheless, looking at California and looking at the things I want to center upon, down lower on this thing, which is at worldometer.info, it'll tell you the number of total cases in California, and it's going straight up, which is what you would expect. And if this includes young, healthy people, this is really meaningless as a number. What we really want to talk about is how many people are getting sick from this, and how do we best curtail large-scale hospital admissions, which was the initial idea of these quarantines in the first place. But more importantly, how to actually make the death rate go down. And if you see in California, the death rate is a line. It's going straight up. It's not slowing down. So the fact that we're doing what we're doing is slowing the ultimate rate at which the process proceeds, but it doesn't do much else. Interestingly enough, the death rate, if you go down to the bottom of this page on worldometers.info, shows you the number of people dying per day hasn't really changed since mid-April. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 people a day, which is what it was back then. Meaning we're not making, as a population, any major strides against the disease, despite the fact that we've done quarantines and other such things. Now, Sweden, as we just talked about, their decision as a country was, we're just going to let this thing take its course. We're going to basically have our people, assuming the large portion of them are going to be very healthy people, we're going to let them get exposed, and we're going to get that herd immunity at some point. And what you find, looking at the same data as we had on the other chart for California, their number of cases goes up too. But again, take into account, this includes people who are healthy, in which case this doesn't tell you much. Look at the daily new cases. it's going up too. Look at the coronavirus deaths, though. It's leveling off and stopping. So they actually have started to obtain herd immunity, which you can see right here. Daily deaths are going straight down like a line. So when the news people have been talking about how silly the people in Sweden are and how they're killing people, in the long run, they just took their hit up front. Statistically, we're not going to know for a period of time whether ultimately more people would have died if they didn't do this. But the key is fewer and fewer people are dying right now, and they are showing they're performing very little, if any, isolation, quarantine, and more importantly, little in the way of economic problems as a function of not performing as a society, which I find very interesting. These last two portions of the graph, total coronavirus deaths in Sweden and total daily deaths in Sweden, they are absolute evidence that they are obtaining this herd immunity, which, if you're looking at the ultimate end of coronavirus in any population, you got two ways to get there. One is you expose enough healthy people that you obtain herd immunity because they process it and they're done. Or you get a vaccine. And according to Dr. Fauci, at least in the last day or so on the news, he indicates there's no real evidence that we're headed rapidly toward a vaccine at all. So I'm not telling you don't wear masks. I'm not telling you don't isolate. I'm telling you that until enough healthy people have had this disease and ultimately have processed it and have become immune to it, we're going to continue to see what we've been seeing in California, which is a total count of deaths increasing, albeit, again, the number is fortunately relatively small relative to the total population in California, which is somewhere around 40 million. 6,000 people is a lot of people, but it's not 40 million people. It's not even a tenth of that. It's a tiny little number, but it's a lot of people. But the question is, the big interesting question is, the way we're managing this disease. I mean, here we are going into the 4th of July weekend and we're going to isolate. And I think not having people on the beaches, being that not everybody's wearing masks, probably makes sense. But to tell people that's going to stop deaths is, I think, a stretch. I think the more honest thing to say is this will keep the rate of the spread of the disease down, but it's not necessarily going to stop the death of anybody who would have died anyway, because at some point, most people are probably going to get it if they go out. All right, well, nevertheless, that's the spiel for today. Questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them as comments. Thank you very much.